All right, guys, so in this video, we are going to be covering everyone's favorite topic, and that is decimals. Now, I know how much people struggle with decimals. Students and also teachers struggle sometimes with knowing how to teach the students because it tends to get quite abstract. By the time they get to decimals, they have worked extensively with whole numbers, they've been introduced to fractions, which are a little bit more abstract, and so that's two types of numbers that they're working with, and then finally they get introduced to decimals and it just blows everything out of the water. So I'm going to show you a couple of models that I'm going to use and that I would encourage you to use, and a couple of methods, especially when operating with decimals. First off, as always, I'm going to introduce you to my models. Okay, model A is the Decimat. Okay, some of you may already be very familiar with the Decimat. A lot of you may already use it in your classrooms. There is a fantastic game out there called Color Me Decimals, and that uses the Decimat. If you jump onto the AMSI website, there's an entire lesson sequence devoted to the Color Me Decimals game. It's free and it's downloadable, so get onto that. But if you haven't been introduced to a Decimat or don't know what it actually is, all it is breaking up our whole. So looking at our whole and how it is partitioned into the decimal fractions. So when you're introducing decimals, I want you to try to steer away from using just the decimals as a decimal point and start looking at and comparing fractions using decimal fractions. So if we look at the Decimat here, we start with our whole. The Decimat is partitioned into 10 parts. Each of these parts represents a tenth or 0.1. Then we take 1/10 and we partition our 1/10 into another 10 parts. So each one of these smaller parts will be our 100th. And then we take our 100th and we partition them into 10 smaller parts. And each one of these teeny tiny things is worth 1,000th. Okay, 0.1, 0.01, 0.001. So that's how we would work with decimats. So in this video, I'm going to be looking at the Decimat. I'm also going to be looking at something called the thousandth grid. And I'm going to show you how we can add using the thousandth grid. And also we're going to be looking at the 100th grid. Now, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a number sentence, a problem. I'm going to start with 0.4 plus 0.2. Addition of decimals can be very straightforward for students because it aligns with the process for adding and subtracting whole numbers. So if we line them up like this, we can simply add each of the columns and we get it's a similar sort of process that the addition and subtraction follows. However, it's when we start multiplying and dividing that this process gets blown out of the water. And this is why, for the same reason that I work with fractions conceptually, I try to get teachers to work with decimals conceptually. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use my Decimat and I'm going to represent my very first decimal as a decimal fraction, and I'm going to color in that many parts. So 0.4 is also 4/10, and 0.2 is 2/10. So I'm going to rewrite them, and I'm going to encourage the students to do that too. Then I'm going to get them to color in 4/10, color that in well. And then I'm going to get them in a different color to color in 2/10. So you can see now that altogether I have 6/10 shaded. So I can rewrite this. If I'm working with my decimal fraction, I simply add the numerators together because the denominators are the same. And if the students have already started working with addition of fractions, they know that fractions with the same denominators means equal parts. So I now have 6/10. All right. If I'm working with a decimal or in decimal form, I know that 0.4 plus 0.2 equals 0.6. Okay, because that's 4/10 and that's 2/10. Now for the representational part, I would actually get them to show this on a number line. So you can get them to draw the representation using an area model, but I always like to try to encourage students to use a different representation when they're working with their draw section. So you're going to be using a number line that is partitioned into tenths. So that's tenths. I'm not going to label them because I don't have a lot of room, but you are going to get the students to label them all the way across. And then beginning at 0.4, and I'm going to add 0.2, and I'm going to end up at 0.6. So get them to use all three methods and approaches to work out what that addition is. Now, obviously, if you've got a different fraction like 0.67 plus 0.85, you would repeat those processes, but again, you would color the appropriate parts of your decimat. You would get the students to rewrite this as a decimal fraction because we want them to start making those connections. And as they go along, they'll start to very quickly realize that they can simply add their fractional parts over their decimal fraction or their decimal fractional parts. So in this case, 67 plus 85 is going to be 152 hundredths. 152 hundredths is 1 and 52 hundredths. All right. If they want, they can work this whole process with this decimat. In a case like this, you're going to need 2 decimats because the students are going to colour in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 tenths and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hundredths. And then they're going to colour in 1, 2, 3, run out of tenths, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 5 hundredths. So they'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So here we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 15 tenths, and 2 hundredths. Or we can write it as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 14 tenths, and 12 hundredths. Any way you shape it, you're going to get 152 hundredths. And so you can see how working with a decimat can really begin to get the students to look at their decimals and see the decimals as those decimal fractions, where we can make those connections with the actual decimal in decimal form.